Resistance is justified. People are occupied. Yep. And again, that's why I was talking about DPRK and wanted to read that thing from North Korea this morning as well. Because remember, Korea is also occupied, and and its resistance, which includes those nuclear weapons and stuff, is part of the same struggle that Palestinians are engaged in right now. It's all part of the same anti-imperial, anti-colonial struggle. Very important that we understand this, and that all the slander and lies about DPRK that you're about North Korea that you're used to hearing all your lives is the same kind of is comes from the same media who has no problem peddling Israeli lies about Palestine. So I hope that now is the time when people can really kind of like wake up to the fact that, hey, if the mainstream media is willing to parrot Israeli propaganda to you blindly, constantly, maybe they're also lying to you about other things that they consider to be their enemies, like DPRK, Cuba, China, etc. Hey, Cinnamon, welcome. You're just in time to hear Melma. I'm not sure when this speech actually happened. This was posted a month ago, though, and this is Malma responding to somebody
My
on
name
here.
is Muhammad Haruna Manta. I'm the High Commissioner of Nigeria. The president in
Anyone
your
got 420 labor vouchers
you
for a
made no
comrade
mention-
in need
The
of a buff?
Nigerian High Commissioner and the ideology in African politics is a total sham. There
Is it fair to say that the difference between the DPRK and Palestine demonstrates what material support from socialist government can do for a resistance movement? Yes. Yeah. And well, and like I said earlier, right? The difference between Palestine and DPRK comes down to DPRK has built up the means to defend itself. But let's not forget that before DPRK got to that point, the US did try to carry out a genocidal campaign against Korea as well. It killed off 20% of their population, the entire Korean population. It leveled Pyongyang, destroying 75% of all buildings. Like, it did that, right? The only thing that keeps them from doing that again is the fact that DPRK has a nuclear deterrent. And that's the only difference. And that's why DPRK does, as I showed earlier in the stream, that's why DPRK provides Palestine with literally like material, military, and arms support. That's why DPRK does that, because DPRK understands that the Palestinian resistance is the same as their resistance. Yeah, they bombed every village. Yes, it was a genocide. They set up the South Korean government in order to perpetrate a genocide on Korean people. That's the whole reason why they set up the puppet government in the South. The whole reason why the South Korean government exists is as a genocidal mechanism. Sigmund Rhee, bringing in all those Japanese collaborators and compradors, that's why. That's what that's what South Korea was set up to do. They abolished all of. Hey, Surfer McGrady, welcome in. If you're not familiar with the history of Korea, first they abolished all the people's councils that South Korea had, because these people councils, sweeping across all of Korea, these people's councils were basically all voting for Kim Il-sung, and the Workers' Party of Korea at that time was split into a few different parties. But they were all voting for these revolutionary parties. And the US was like, well, we can't fucking have that. And they literally openly said that the reason why they were the reason why they were doing that is because Koreans didn't have the right to govern themselves. It's an age-old narrative, right? That, oh, well, because the whole reason, the whole justification for splitting Korea in two, into the North and the South, was that the North would be if you don't remember or if you're unaware, Korea at that time was a Japanese colony. It was controlled directly by Japan. Japan came in, occupied it, controlled the country, made the language illegal, many other things, right? So what the reason for the splitting was two American generals in a room decided without any consultation of any Korean people or even anybody from USSR or anything like that. Just these two American generals just said, "Okay, we're going to draw a line on the map of the Korean Peninsula right here on the 38th parallel, and we're going to say the southern half will be the U.S. disarming the Japanese army, and the northern half will be USSR disarming the Japanese army." Because USSR at that time moved into Manchuria, they dealt a pretty large blow to the Japanese army, which, by the way, is the thing that forced Japan to surrender, not the atomic bombs. And the USSR's presence in that region, in Manchuria, is the reason why the US generals felt it necessary to make sure that USSR played some part in disarming the Japanese military. So that's what the split was originally meant to be. Just this side, the South, we disarm the Japanese military. That side, the North, the USSR does it. After this process was complete, the USSR left. And they started setting up, and the North started setting up their own people's councils. In the South, the US basically never left. Still there today. Not only did they not leave, but when DPRK started setting up their own people's councils in the South and started voting for like the Workers' Democratic Party, the US was like, okay, no, we abolished these, and instead they brought in a comprador to Japanese imperialism who grew up in the US called Syngman Rhee. That's who they brought in. So Syngman Rhee was brought in. He was born, and I think he was born and pretty much raised in the U.S. And he was brought in because they knew that he had no actual connection to people there. And then knowing that they couldn't use that people that the actual Koreans wanted elected. So what did they do? They used these former Korean people who formerly collaborated with the Japanese imperialists. Because remember, when you have an occupying power, a factor in that occupation is compradors who are of your nation but will then turn against your nation and work with the imperialists or with the colonialists, right? And you had people who wanted to do that for their own benefit during the Japanese occupation. Well, the US, they thought, well, these would be the perfect people to bring in and set up our puppet government based on. That's what they did. And, by the way, contrary to popular belief about it being somehow DPRK, by the way, the narrative about Korea invading itself is a bit ridiculous. But even if we go with that, right? The truth of the matter is, the South was the one attacking first and actually launched an invasion over the 38th parallel, attacking the North. And it did so on a Sunday, on a holiday. And their whole justification was, oh, well, seeing that we set up South Korea as a Christian nation, nobody will believe that we actually started the war on a Sunday. And they did. It worked. I bet people I bet comrades in my chat now were taught in schools. I bet there's people who were taught in schools about how Korea invaded South Korea. Right? Rather than the US instigating this war and basically pushing for their puppet army in the South to push over the 38th parallel, shelling people in their villages. Which is what the North then responded to, was people being shelled in their homes. But I digress. I mean, that's why, look, hey, if you get the communist quote redemption, got a good communist quote, I think. Or it's actually from Kim Il Sung, and it's from what I'm talking about here. See if I can find.
Julian, books have stuff recorded down all over the years from people. And if we could find a book with someone that had similar problems, just take what they wrote down in the book and make it. Fuck. Sorry, Trini. Take what they wrote down and make it ours.
Okay, this is from a book right here. Look at this. So this is Kim Il Sung talking just after war. The actual situation in South Korea is fundamentally different than that in North Korea. There, the US military government, having seized all power, oppressed the Korean people. And the introduction of democratic reforms is quite inconceivable. Some people think that South Korea merely lags behind North Korea. This is utterly wrong viewpoint, implying that South Korea too is advancing along the road of democracy, only at a little slower tempo than North Korea. In reality, North Korea is advancing along the road of democratic development, whereas South Korea is moving along an entirely different course. The indicator by which to tell democracy from pseudo-democracy lies in whether the people can participate in state administration or not. And the South Korean people are denied the right to participate in government. They have not the slightest elementary democratic rights. The People's Committees set up by South Korean people immediately after liberation were not recognized and, worse still, they were dissolved and their functionaries were arrested and thrown in jail. The democratic political parties, deprived of the freedom of political activities, are forced to go underground. Kim Il Sung, 1946. Think about it for a second. And think about how maybe everything you've been taught about Korea could be a lie. I'm gonna give you a bonus one. Here's a bonus one. I'll give you a 2-for-1, Sam. Hey, Rick, welcome in. Why, after World War II, did the US imperialist machine want so badly to destroy communism everywhere? Was it just for profit and expansion of capitalist markets? Yeah. I mean, behind closed doors, yeah, it was to secure markets that they saw were at the threat of being closed off to them. Openly, they justified it as them wanting to stop the spread of authoritarian communism, right? Yeah, communism bad, don't you know? 50 bajillion killed or whatever it is. I'm giving you a 2-for-1 because we're talking about, of course, Palestine and the liberation struggle going on in Palestine. So here's one right here. You love Kim Il Sung. The oppressed peoples can liberate themselves only through struggle. This is a simple and clear truth confirmed by history. It is necessary to expose the false propaganda of the imperialists and thoroughly dispel the illusion that they will give up their position in the colonies and dependent countries with goodwill. Where there is oppression, there is bound to be resistance. It is inevitable that the oppressed people should fight for their emancipation. As long as imperialism plunders and oppresses small and weak nations by force, it remains an inalienable right of the oppressed nations to rise up in arms and fight against the aggressors. Nice, nice. What do you call a 3-for-1? Bobo? Why were they saying communism was so bad? I mean, they were just saying that it was authoritarian and that people in people in USSR, like, they couldn't decide anything, and the party, the Politburo, if only if you worked in the Politburo were you able to get the kind of any kind of goods that like people in America were able to get just by going to the store. Oh yeah, that doesn't roll off the tongue nearly as well. Yeah, same shit they say today, basically. Bogut. Damn, that does not roll off the tongue. Who the hell came up with that system? The fuck is that? That Latin or something? What's going on there? Doesn't seem like it would actually be a word, does it? Here's your 3-for-1, because this one's short. We're taught at such an early age to be against the communists. Yet, most of us don't have the faintest idea what communism is. Only a fool lets somebody else tell him who his enemy is. Love that one. Dialed up the Jesus and the in God we trust, and that's the tool that get everyone to go along. Yeah, that helped. That helped. Also, I mean, they went on about how Stalin any moment was going to invade Western Europe. The Iron Curtain. Remember that? Remember? Ooh, the Iron Curtain. What's going on behind the Iron Curtain? It's Stalin. Stalin getting ready to invade any moment now. Right? Western Europe, anytime. Here it comes. Any minute now. And then when Khrushchev was the leader, same thing. And then even when they were like basically bending over backwards, just showing they absolutely had no intention of doing that, the US was still running with that narrative. Don't fucking care. Yeah, older people generally say that, yeah, that freedom. All about the freedom, don't you know? Settlers also had their own motivations for trying to preserve their system. Yeah. Well, of course the USSR wasn't invading anyone, but that's not what they said. I mean, even in the case of Korea, Ninja Can, they said that Korea, the whole reason Korea was like that is because it was a USSR puppet. Cuba, USSR puppet. Vietnam, USSR puppet. That's the narrative they use. So they said that the USSR indeed was invading people. They were saying that they were using Korea here as a puppet. They invaded Korea, and here they are using it as a puppet. And therefore, the USSR is controlling this, right? Same with Nicaragua. They said the same shit about that. Cuba, again. And then when somebody stands in solidarity and Cuba like sends missiles or whatever for strategic solidarity, then it's proof of that, right? Or the fact that they're trading partners together. It's proof then of this, that they're just puppets of the USSR. That was the narrative all along. And that's what the whole Iron Curtain bullshit was about, too. Yeah, you would think so. You would think that, I mean, if you extend the same logic, yes, that is how it should work. But obviously, imperialist logic isn't all that logical from the point of view of working people, because it exists to justify exploitation and oppression of the majority. To this day, I still hear them say similar things about China controlling DPRK. Yes! Well, it's Orientalist bullshit. And hey, Squidadeer, welcome in, comrade. And I will say, you know, even some well-meaning communist sebs really like run with that narrative and like make it out like, oh, it's China who's saving DPRK, or like China is the whole reason why DPRK still exists today. It's like yeah, China has contributed enormously to helping DPRK develop, and I think like running with that kind of narrative really discredits a lot of like what DPRK as a small nation fighting against imperialism has been able to accomplish. Right? I think that minimizes that. And I think that's an expression of what I like to call big power chauvinism, where white people really like to look at the big powers of the world and sort of like analyze the world based on these big powers. You know, like that's the way they see the world. Instead of like from the perspective of colonized people, the way colonized people see the world is that we have the oppressor nations and then we have the oppressed nation. You know, it's a whole different outlook because of this lack of experience with colonialism other than what they read about in books and stuff. And I'd like to remind everybody too, if you can extend your defense from Cuba, if you defend Cuba, which you rightly should, I hope you all do, everyone who's in my chat here today. I hope everyone in my group or who has followed me long enough is able to defend Cuba. Please, all I ask you, I'm not asking you to think that DPRK, or not asking you to think that North Korea is some fucking paradise on earth or something like this. Right? That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I think myself. What I'm asking is that if you are someone who's calls yourself a communist and you can defend DPRK, or you can defend Cuba, either one, you get to defend the other one too, right? That you should have a different character, like critical support for anything that weakens the empire, but you need to have a different level of support for socialist countries that are like active participants in proletarian revolution. And you have to be very careful about when you're engaging in critiques with these countries and stuff, right? Like don't allow your critique to just be you parroting some mainstream narrative line. And if you don't know, the best thing is to not critique. Right? There's enough slander against DPRK. There's enough slander against China. There's enough slander against Vietnam. There's enough of that shit out there. If you want to critically examine them and have your critiques of it, that's fine, right? Just maybe don't do it in like big public open spaces where you're trying to educate people and get people on a better side of history, because it doesn't legitimate anything. When people turn around and like they feel the need to defend DPRK or whatever, and feel the need to then go, oh, but you know, there could be horrible things there. There could be a prison system there or something like this, without actually having concrete evidence or actually knowing that. What you're doing is not legitimating yourself. You're just like making people go, okay, well, the status quo is right about this, and therefore, at least to some degree, the violence and the rhetoric against them is justified. That's all you're doing. You're allowing them to feel better about the violence and that rhetoric that allows for the violence, right? Instead of like doing what you should be doing as a communist and fighting against that kind of thing. Like if you're in the Imperial Core, especially, it should be your your ardent duty when it comes to any kind of foreign nation to just fight back against whatever the fucking imperialist bullshit is about it, and that's it. That's your duty. If you can't do that, you're not being that great of a communist, right? Hey Larry, I hate bringing up DPRK and just hearing a barrage of the same dozen nonsense talking points. Hey, I feel ya. I am too. I am too. But it's like with communism itself. We have to. Part of what we got to do is repeat ourselves over and over, even when we're explaining basic concepts. Like, we are not against democracy. We're for the expansion of democracy stuff, right? And you don't have to read a lot to just be like, hey, DPRK shouldn't be sanctioned and embargoed and stuff. Doesn't require a lot of reading to extend that sort of defense at the very minimal, right? And whatever someone else can say to you, like, you should be able to always bring them back to, yeah, but does that give us the right to interfere, to bomb, to sanction? You think that the sanctions are increasing their ability to do this and that? You don't have to be completely informed about every intricate little detail about DPRK, and that's what's so important. That's why I'm saying, don't if you don't have the concrete information stuff, don't just be like, well, the mainstream media could be right. Just push back. Be like, just push back against it. That's all you got to do. Like, hey, maybe we shouldn't sanction and embargo these people. Maybe DPRK has never invaded any people before. If they hit you with, oh, DPRK invaded South Korea, well, all you have to do is say Korea invaded itself, really, and give them a look like that. Like, really, it invaded itself. That's all you got to say. And yeah, Sebs, that's the problem with with a lot of the critical support. It's like whites don't understand what critical support means. Like, they think they need to be critical for the sake of being critical and not have the freaking nuance and sensical thinking to maybe not spread rhetoric that ultimately continues to perpetuate the hegemonic imperialist colonial propaganda against these countries. Exactly. Like dynasty. The one you hear about DPRK all the time is dynasty or monarchy. You just say, honestly, so fucking what? Right? Say, so fucking what? DPRK, if it does have a monarchy, if it does have a dynasty, it sure as fuck doesn't invade people the way the US does, the way Britain does, the way white European colonialism does. So who the fuck cares? Honest to God, like, I can prove to you, and we can go into a whole discussion about why it's not a monarchy, and I can tell you all the reasons why it's not a monarchy, and that's all good for the people who want to learn about that. But a lot of people don't want to hear that shit, and most people that you're gonna encounter on the stream that are gonna actually say that, there's no point in like having this big discussion with them half the time. You're just as likely to get your point across if you just say, who the fuck cares? DPRK has never invaded anybody. Why are they being embargoed? Why are they being sanctioned? Why are they being targeted? Okay, real question. What do people mean when they say critical support for? Do they mean critical as in very supporting, or critical as in being critical of someone something? Well, we all know what whites mean. ETR. I think I saw this poll on Twitter not long ago. I think European people, when they say that, they mean that you cannot support something without having critical things to say. You always got to have a critical, it's like you got to have it in the chamber, right? Something critical to say. No matter, just in case some reactionary chud comes up to you and has an objection with you defending DPRK or Cuba or something like this. It's like they then feel like you have to have one in the chamber ready to go. That's like, well, it's a dynasty, but at least this, right? And I see this all the time with streamers, especially who have bigger platforms, where they don't want to like cause a big stir in their audience. So instead of just pushing back against DPRK propaganda and stuff, they just say, "Oh well, DPRK might have a despotic, psychotic dictator, but this." And what you got to understand is when you preface your defense of DPRK by saying it has a despotic, demonic dictator or whatever the fuck you just said, you didn't legitimate what you're about to say next. What you did is you just delegitimate it. You made what you're about to say next make no sense to everybody, and they just throw it out the window. Like, oh well, they do have a demonic, despotic dictator. So what the fuck do I care about what he's gonna say next about the propaganda against them? You see? You're not legitimating your argument in front of liberals. What you're doing is legitimating themselves feeling correct about their white supremacist, anti-communist outlooks. That's all you're doing. And I think white people need to realize that. And I think we just need to stop saying critical support. Because they just can't understand it. Hawaii had a constitutional monarchy, so ask people who bring that up if Hawaii deserves sovereignty, right? And I mean, for me, one reason why I did look deeper at DPRK's leadership and go, well, how does it actually function? I'm not willing to just believe it's a European idea of what a monarchy is, because you know what? Coming from Mi'kmaq nations and Wabanaki Confederacy nations in general, had what was called hereditary chiefs, and these were discredited as being like, I've heard in so many arguments with fucking absolute chuds about how that was a type of monarchy or dynasty or whatever. But like the way our hereditary chiefs were set up was that these leaders were accountable to the people, and that if the relatives, if the ancestors, if the people who came after, like, yeah, it would be handed down within the family. The leader at the time, when his son grows up or his daughter grows up or whatever, his child grows up, would become the next leader. That's true. But when that leader is no longer performing their duty, contributing to the collective, doing its part, then that leadership is removed and a new one is selected democratically. That's not the same as a monarchy or dynasty, and that's why personally I first was like, okay, I gotta understand how DPRK works. And when I studied DPRK for many years, I came to realize that it's set up exactly the way Cuba is. It's exactly set up the way Cuba is. It's the workers' councils, it's got a mass line, it's got candidates have to live within their constituency, people have to be able to knock on their candidate's door any time of the day. Anybody has to be able to go to whoever their representative is in their area. They have to be able to knock on the door, and they have to be able to go, excuse me, I'm having a problem with my family. We're having a family crisis. I need to come in and talk to somebody. And you know what? Your deputy that is elected as your political representative has to have you come in. They make you tea. Okay, what do you need to talk about? What's going on at home? Right? And this is the way their politicians work in Cuba, in DPRK. And it's like, and then people can't understand in the West why they support their leadership, right? Why they support their parties. They just it like can't it doesn't register with them because we don't have anything like that. Yeah, democratic centralism will take different forms based on culture and development. Exactly. The important thing is that the essence of democratic centralism, is respected, which is that the will of the majority, the will of the masses, is that which is accepted by all. And that has to be something that's implemented in all state organs, right? I mean, if you want to know how democratic DPRK is, like, I constantly try and point out, like, DPRK is democratic on a level that most people in the US will never be able to understand. Because in DPRK, you're not going to care so much, like, I'm just going to say, you're not going to care so much about who your national leader is when you have a say over every little representative that's in your actual constituency that actually has like say over the matters which dictate your life, and like people who are actually going up there and voicing for you and like, hey, we need this in our area, so this needs to be addressed in the cabinet, or this legislator, right? Those are the people you especially rally behind. And Kim Jong Un ends up just being a representative of all of this, right? Which is why he has just this huge support. Because they're not worried about what fucking Kim Jong Un is doing, other than he writes some good material that's like, hey, the people should struggle to better implement the party of the policy of loving the people. Of course they love that. The fuck? Who isn't gonna love that, right? So to them, it's like, and it's not only that. We're in an ad break right now, so I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna pause on the part where I'm about to say about workplace democracy, and then when we get everybody come back from the ad break, whoever is on it, I'm gonna explain that, you know, when you have democracy in your workplace, even when you're the one who's responsible for choosing the managers from the cycle of people, the cycle of workers in your own workplace, who the national leader is, kind of like you see them in a favorable light. I don't know. And Kim Jong Un, that's why Kim Jong Un is called the premier leader, right? If you actually look at the way DPRK talks about Kim Jong Un in their own society, they call him the premier leader, meaning he's like the most prominent leader, not the only leader, just the most prominent one, because he's the most famous. Yeah. And again, it's like, it's so easy when you're the leader of that. Like the way Kim Jong-un leads is, again, he publishes a work that's like, hey, we should better realize the policy of respecting and loving the people. We should better implement the healthcare policy. We should increase the production of of agriculture, right? That's and so when you're passing simple, easy to understand lines like this, yeah. Yeah, people tend to support that shit. Can you imagine, like in the US or Canada, if you had a leader who just got up and said, without all the flowery, muddy language and all the dancing around and the circus, just came right out and said, look, giving everybody housing, we're going to make sure everybody has enough to eat, guaranteed, make sure everybody has guaranteed health care at all levels, even preventative health care. What the fuck do you think the reaction would be to that? It's so asinine. Like, yeah, people are gonna rally behind and support a program like that. Wild. Alright, back from the ad break in 10 seconds. All right, welcome back from the ad, everyone. Anyone who's still hanging out. I just wanted to say, like, before I went off to the ad there, I was starting to say about how, you know, it's really not that concerning who the national leader is when, again, that national leader's job is to pass speeches and rhetoric and stuff that's like, hey, what we should do is continue on with our policy of respecting and loving the people. Yeah, people are going to like that. Right? Can you imagine having like a national leader in Canada or the US or something who, instead of having to pretend like they're serving the people while quietly serving the interests of power and money, can you imagine if they could just come forward and say, we want to give everybody housing. We want to provide everybody with food. We should Further strengthening the national healthcare system to include preventative medicine. What do you think the response from people is going to be? They're going to be like, yeah, that guy's right. That's what we should do. So, I mean, that's why Kim Jong-un gets so much support in that regard. But the real people who are implementing policy and stuff are the people who, again, live in the communities with them. And, you know, DPRK is one of the only places where all the industries, all of the workplaces are state owned, other than the cooperative farms. Aside from the cooperative farms, all of the workplaces are state owned. And as a result of them being state owned in DPRK, they are subject to themselves democratic centralism. And they are also subject to the subsidized union system that DPRK has on top of that. And what this means is in DPRK, what you have is the party has, and the people's state over the course of the revolution has implemented a system where every single workplace now has workplace democracy. I'm just curious, like, I wonder if, like, say we had a party here that made sure all of our workplaces, maximize the employment in order to better serve the people and give as many people gainful, employment that they could, so that they could also minimize the hours of everybody else that works there. And then on top of that, made it so that you had a direct say in everything that went on in that workplace. Oh, and that your management wasn't a professional team of managers who serve for life as managers, but were a rotating group that are chosen from within the workers themselves. I wonder if that would be a popular thing around here. If that were implemented concretely. I wonder if that would be hard to get out of power. Just some thoughts, right?